we are witnessing the absolute cold-blooded perfection of the expendable proxy. If you strip away the soaring rhetoric, the press conference platitudes, and the carefully curated flags waving on your social media feeds, what remains is an architecture of geopolitical violence so brilliantly cynical, it borders on art. We are not watching a mere territorial dispute in Eastern Europe. We are watching a superpower masterclass in how to bleed a strategic competitor to death without ever having to write a single condolence letter to a mother in Ohio, or London, or Berlin. Just days ago, a kinetic shockwave rippled through the southern front that perfectly illustrates this brutal calculus. Ukrainian Special Operations Contingents, ghost units tethered intimately to deep intelligence networks, launched a highly synchronized, devastating assault. Their objective was not a sprawling metropolis, but a miserable, shattered settlement named Stepanhursk. Located roughly 30 kilometers south of Zaporizhzhia, this town sits astride the E105 highway. To the untrained eye, the E105 is just a line on a map. To the military logistician, it is the jugular vein of the entire regional occupation. By physically expelling the Russian presence from this choke point in the past 72 hours, these specialized units did not just capture concrete and pulverized brick. They effectively severed the primary logistical artery that approximately 65,000 Russian personnel have desperately depended on for the last 7 months of grinding, static warfare. Take a moment to let that number settle in your mind. 65,000 human beings. That is the population of a mid-sized city, or a fully packed NFL stadium, suddenly cut off from their primary circulatory system of survival. An army of that size does not just require bullets. It requires hundreds of tons of daily caloric intake, rivers of diesel fuel to keep generators and armor idling in the freezing mud, and a constant, uninterrupted flow of medical supplies to patch the flesh torn apart by shrapnel. When you sever the E105, you are not just executing a maneuver. You are engineering mass asphyxiation. You are forcing a clock to start ticking above the heads of 65,000 men who are now effectively stranded on a hostile island of their own making. Moscow's reaction to this creeping strangulation over the past several months has been one of desperate algorithmic attrition to maintain their grip on the Zaporizhzhia administrative area, a region claimed through the stroke of a pen in a sterile Kremlin annexation ceremony back in 2022. The Russian command has persistently fed their forces into a meat grinder, but they are not using expendable penal battalions for this specific task. They have been deploying small, localized infiltration squads, often consisting of just 5 to 10 soldiers at a time. And these are not raw recruits, they are elements drawn from elite airborne units, the 7th and 98th VDV divisions. These are the men who were historically trained to drop behind NATO lines, to seize airfields in a blaze of glory. Now, their reality is infinitely more pathetic and terrifying. Imagine the micro-reality of one of these 5-man VDV squads over the last 48 hours. You are wearing the striped Telnyashka under your armor, the proud symbol of the airborne. But your grand strategic mission has been reduced to crawling on your belly through a frozen, cratered lunar landscape of a shattered tree line outside Stepanhursk, trying to capture a single destroyed cinderblock building for cover. Your boots are soaked through with freezing, iron-rich mud. You cannot light a fire. You cannot speak above a whisper. And then, you hear it, the high-pitched, metallic whine of a quadcopter drone, hovering 300 feet above you. It is a piece of plastic and circuitry that costs less than the optic on your rifle. But it is carrying a mortar shell, and it is piloted by a 20-year-old staring at a screen miles away. In that agonizing second before the payload drops, the grand imperial ambitions of your commanders evaporate. You are not a conqueror. You are just biological material, waiting to be vaporized to protect a political narrative you will never live to see. This is the agonizing paradox of the front line. But to truly understand the mechanics of this conflict, we must pull the camera back from the freezing mud of Stepanhursk and pan over to the climate-controlled boardrooms of the global defense sector. The skies over Zaporizhzhia have become the world's premier beta testing laboratory for next-generation warfare. Major industrial players, particularly those architecting advanced drone hardware and counter-electronic warfare solutions, are experiencing a financial renaissance. The ongoing, insatiable requirement for these systems in the Ukrainian arsenal is not just a military necessity. It is a profound economic stimulus for a very specific tier of the global elite. Think about the sheer scale of the electronic warfare environment along that severed E-105 corridor. It is an invisible electromagnetic thunderstorm. Missiles are being spoofed, drones are having their GPS coordinates hijacked in mid-air, and communication frequencies are being jammed with white noise. The corporations designing the software patches to overcome these localized jamming bubbles are profiting handsomely. Every time a Ukrainian special operator successfully navigates a kamikaze drone through a Russian electronic defense net to strike a supply truck near Stepanhursk, a data packet is generated. That telemetry is beamed back to defense contractors in the West. Algorithms are tweaked. Upgrades are sold. Stock prices experience a subtle, healthy bump. Here at World Horizon View, we do not look at the emotional headlines designed to make you cheer for a team. We track the cold, structural shifts of global power. And the structural shift here is undeniable. We are watching the commodification of modern combat. Key decision-makers in supportive governments understand this dynamic perfectly. By highlighting localized, tactical gains, like the brilliant, surgical strike to expel forces from Stepanhursk, these politicians secure continued political and financial backing from their domestic audiences. They stand at podiums, point to maps, and speak of freedom and resilience. They frame a 30-kilometer advance as a moral triumph, ensuring the spigot of funding remains wide open. They manage the optics of the war the way a producer manages a television series, ensuring the audience gets just enough victory to justify the next season's budget, but never enough decisive momentum to trigger a catastrophic, uncontrollable escalation. But who pays the actual price for this carefully managed geopolitical equilibrium? The primary burdens land squarely on the shoulders of conscripted and professional fighters on both sides, who are experiencing disproportionate, catastrophic losses in a technologically asymmetric environment. A human body has not evolved since the Bronze Age, but it is now being subjected to autonomous loitering munitions and thermobaric artillery. The flesh tears exactly the same way it did 1,000 years ago. But the efficiency of the tearing has been perfected, and it is not just the men in uniform. The true, unspoken tragedy rests on the resident populations subjected to extended logistical strains and profound security risks in these affected southern zones. Let us ground this macro strategy in the raw, unforgiving reality of a civilian trapped near the E-105 corridor. Imagine a grandfather living in a village just a few miles from the new line of contact. He has survived the last 2 years by keeping his head down and his windows boarded. But with the severing of the logistics lines, the fragile ecosystem of survival has completely collapsed. He sits in a freezing cellar, the walls vibrating rhythmically as counter-battery artillery fire thuds in the distance. He is rationing a single jar of pickled tomatoes, hoarding his last few drops of kerosene. He does not care about the geopolitical chessboard. He does not care about the strategic degradation of the Russian military apparatus. He cares that his wife's heart medication ran out 2 weeks ago, and the roads are now mined and stalked by hunter-killer drones that cannot distinguish between a military resupply van and a civilian scrambling for firewood. To the think tanks in Washington and London, his suffering is a regrettable externality, a rounding error in a magnificent strategic victory. To him, it is the end of the world. This brings us to the most uncomfortable, darkest truth of all: the surface-level partnership assistance extended to the Ukrainian defenders. The billions in aid, the advanced weapon systems, the satellite intelligence that made the Stepanhursk operation possible is masking a profoundly ruthless dynamic. we must ask ourselves if this nation and its citizens are being deliberately positioned as the ultimate expendable proxy. They are being structurally compelled to absorb horrifying generational losses, entire towns leveled, a demographic collapse that will haunt the region for a century, a generation of young men and women returning home with missing limbs and shattered minds. And for what? To erode the conventional, military capabilities of a strategic competitor. The architecture of this strategy is brilliant precisely because of its asymmetry. Distant superpowers are safeguarding their overarching hegemonic supremacy without necessitating their direct involvement in hostilities. Not a single American soldier has to bleed out in the mud outside Zaporizhzhia. Not a single British Marine has to dodge a thermobaric blast in Stepanhursk. They provide the capital, the hardware, and the intelligence. The proxy provides the blood. It is a strategic transaction where the currency is human lives, paid out daily on the frozen steppes of Eastern Europe. If we wargame this out over the next 6 to 12 months, the capture of the E-105 artery is not the end of a chapter. It is the beginning of a much darker phase. Those 65,000 Russian troops south of Zaporizhzhia will not simply evaporate. Logistical asphyxiation takes time. They will begin to cannibalize their own supply lines. Command structures will fray as ammunition rationing becomes severe. We will likely see a dramatic increase in the use of indiscriminate, heavy glide bombs by the Russian aerospace forces, attempting to obliterate Ukrainian positions from a safe distance because their ground elements are too starved of supplies to mount effective counterattacks. Stepanhursk will not be held as a functioning town. It will be held as a smoking crater, defended by men who are under constant, terrifying bombardment. The defense contractors will continue to iterate their systems. The politicians will continue to solicit funding based on the narrative of the plucky defender holding the line. The grand strategic objective of slowly, methodically grinding down the Russian war machine will proceed exactly on schedule. The geopolitical accountants will look at their ledgers and see an incredibly high return on investment, the destruction of a major geopolitical rival's conventional forces for pennies on the dollar, with the entire kinetic cost outsourced to a desperate partner. But a strategy built on the slow, agonizing bleeding of a proxy nation cannot be sustained indefinitely without fundamentally altering the moral and physical landscape of the world. At some point, the anvil breaks. At some point, the demographic reality of a nation asked to fight a superpower to the last man catches up with the heroic narratives spun in foreign capitals. As the lines harden around the ruins of Stepanhursk, and those 65,000 cut-off troops dig deeper into the earth like cornered animals, the illusion of a clean, technologically managed war shatters. We are left with the ancient, ugly reality of siege mechanics, overlaid with the terrifying precision of the 21st century. Here at World Horizon View, we refuse to look away from the gears of this machine. We analyze the uncomfortable realities because survival in the coming decade depends on seeing the board clearly, not as we wish it to be, but as the architects of power have designed it. The strategic bleeding of a rival through an expendable proxy is a tactic as old as empire itself, but never has it been executed with such clinical technological precision. So, look past the headlines. Look past the localized victories. Look at the empty factories in the heartlands of Europe, struggling with energy costs. Look at the soaring stock portfolios of the aerospace firms. Look at the freezing cellar in Zaporizhzhia, and the terrified conscript in the mud. This leaves us with a question that demands an answer, a question that separates the realists from the romantics. If the current grand strategy relies entirely on sacrificing the future of an entire nation to permanently cripple a strategic rival, at what point does the cost of victory become indistinguishable from the absolute destruction of the people we claim to be saving? Are we witnessing the defense of sovereignty, or the most cynical geopolitical transaction of the 21st century? Let me know your unfiltered thoughts in the comments below. Drop your analysis. Challenge the premise. and subscribe if you are ready to face the world exactly as it is.